"Please, mister, they took our mama," the tiny black twins cry out, bursting through saloon doors to beg the cruel giant cowboy for help, and he instantly bursts into tears, his massive frame shaking with sobs that silence the entire room. The frontier town sees these children as nothing, disposable outcasts destined for the workhouse or worse. But the giant cowboy, known for his heartless reputation and iron fist, cannot stop weeping at their desperate plea. His tears reveal a buried connection that could either save the twins from losing their mother forever or destroy them all when the corrupt sheriff discovers why the most dangerous man in town would risk everything for two powerless children. The clock ticks toward the evening train that will steal their mother away permanently, while the giant's mysterious breakdown threatens to unravel secrets that powerful men have killed to protect. Can two small voices move a mountain of a man to defy an entire corrupt system, or will his tears be the last kindness they ever receive? The morning sun cast long shadows across Copper Ridge as 8-year-old Jasper Jones shook his twin sister awake. Their small cabin felt wrong, too quiet, too cold. "Whisper, where's Mama?" The girl's dark eyes widened as she surveyed their ransacked home. Drawers hung open like gaping mouths, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Their mother's sewing basket lay overturned, spools of thread rolling into corners. Jasper found the note pinned to their kitchen table with a rusty nail. His hands trembled as he read the crude handwriting aloud. "Your mama has work to finish. She comes home when the job is done. Keep quiet or she don't come home at all." Whisper grabbed his arm and pointed to the window. Through the dirty glass, they watched Sheriff Malachi Riggs' deputies loading their mother into a wagon. Sarah Jones fought against the ropes binding her wrists, her mouth covered with a dirty cloth. The wagon disappeared down Main Street in a cloud of dust. Jasper pulled on his boots and grabbed Whisper's hand. "We're getting help." The twins ran through Copper Ridge's dusty streets as the town awakened around them. Shopkeepers swept their porches and avoided eye contact. Women clutched their shawls tighter and hurried their own children inside. At Murphy's General Store, Jasper approached the counter where old Murphy counted coins. "Please, sir, Sheriff Rigg took our mama. Can you help us?" Murphy's weathered face hardened. "Boy, you best not go spreading stories about the sheriff. Folks who cause trouble have a way of disappearing around here." The store fell silent. Other customers stared at the twins with mixture of pity and fear before shuffling toward the exit. "But she didn't do nothing wrong," Jasper pressed. Murphy shook his head and returned to his counting. "Your mama's been forging documents, boy. Everyone knows it. Sheriff's just doing his job." Outside the store, Whisper tugged Jasper's sleeve and pointed down the street. Through the saloon's grimy windows, they could see the silhouette of Colossus Kane. The giant cowboy sat alone at a corner table, his massive frame dwarfing the wooden chair beneath him. "He's the only one big enough to stand up to the sheriff," Jasper whispered. Kane's reputation preceded him wherever he rode. 6 feet 8 inches of muscle and scars, with hands that could crush a man's skull or draw his pistol faster than lightning. Bounty hunters from 3 territories spoke his name in hushed tones. He'd never been known to show mercy to anyone. The twins approached Doc Henley next, finding the elderly physician tending to a patient's broken arm. When Jasper explained their situation, Doc's kind eyes filled with genuine sorrow. "Children, I wish I could help, but Kane's dangerous and the sheriff owns this town. Your mama got herself mixed up in something bigger than all of us." "What kind of something?" Jasper asked. Doc glanced around nervously. "Land deeds, property transfers, papers that make poor folks' homes belong to rich folks instead. Your mama has beautiful handwriting, and some people been taking advantage of that skill." Whisper pulled out a small notebook and began sketching rapidly. Her drawings showed their mother sitting at a desk, copying documents while men in badges watched over her shoulder. "She's been documenting this for months," Doc realized, studying Whisper's artwork. "This child sees everything." The morning wore on as rejection followed rejection. The banker claimed ignorance. The preacher offered prayers but no action. Even Rosa Martinez, who ran the boarding house and had always been kind to their family, shook her head sadly. Mija, Kane is not a man you approach lightly. He's killed more people than the cholera, and Sheriff Rigg has connections all the way to the territorial capital. By noon, desperation drove the twins toward their last hope. The Dusty Dollar Saloon squatted at the end of Main Street like a wooden beast. Piano music and rough laughter spilled through its swinging doors. Jasper squeezed Whisper's hand. Mama always said we got to be brave when there's no other choice. They pushed through the saloon doors into a world of tobacco smoke and whiskey fumes. Conversations died as every eye turned toward them. Card games paused mid-deal. Even the piano player's fingers froze above the keys. Kane sat in the far corner, his back to the wall and his hat pulled low over his eyes. A half-empty bottle of whiskey stood before him like a liquid barrier between himself and the world. His massive hands rested on the table, scarred knuckles telling stories of violence and survival. The twins crossed the room on unsteady legs. Spittoons and broken glass crunched under their small feet. The smell of unwashed bodies and stale beer made Whisper cover her nose with her sleeve. They stopped 3 feet from Kane's table. Up close, he seemed even larger. His shoulders stretched the seams of his leather vest. A Colt Peacemaker hung at his hip, its handle worn smooth from countless draws. Jasper found his voice despite the fear crushing his chest. "Please, mister, they took our mama. You gotta help us." Kane's head snapped up, revealing pale blue eyes that had seen too much death. For a moment, those eyes searched the twins' faces as if looking for something lost. Then the most feared man in 3 territories began to weep. Tears streamed down Kane's weathered cheeks as he stared at the twins. His massive hands trembled against the wooden table. The entire saloon held its breath, watching the impossible sight of their most feared resident breaking down like a child. Kane's fingers found the worn locket hanging around his neck. He clutched it through his shirt as memories crashed over him like a dam bursting. A woman's gentle voice singing lullabies, tiny hands grasping his calloused fingers, the sound of baby laughter echoing through a small cabin. "Sarah," he whispered, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. Jasper stepped closer, confusion replacing fear. "You know our mama." Kane wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and studied the twins' faces more carefully. Jasper had Sarah's determined chin and fierce eyes. Whisper possessed her mother's delicate features and observant nature. Both children carried themselves with a dignity that reminded Kane of the woman he'd loved and lost. "How long has your mama been in Copper Ridge?" Kane's voice came out rough as sandpaper. 6 months, Jasper replied. "We came from Denver when Papa died." Kane's heart clenched. He'd been searching for Sarah and the children for 2 years, following cold trails across 3 territories. They'd been here the entire time, living under his nose while he drank away his guilt in this very saloon. Whisper pulled out her notebook and began sketching frantically. Her pencil captured Kane's face with remarkable accuracy, adding details that suggested she'd been watching him for weeks. At the bottom of the page, she drew a heart with a crack down the middle. "She don't talk much anymore," Jasper explained, watching his sister work. "Not since we got here." Kane recognized the signs. He'd seen trauma silence stronger people than a small girl. Whatever had happened to his family during their time apart had left deep wounds. Doc Henley pushed through the saloon doors, his medical bag clutched in one hand. Behind him came Rosa Martinez, her flour-dusted apron suggesting she'd left her kitchen in haste. Both stopped short when they saw Kane's tear-stained face. "Colossus," Doc said carefully. "These children need help, but Sheriff Rigg is dangerous. He's got half the territorial government in his pocket." Kane stood slowly, his full height casting a shadow across the twins. "Tell me about the documents." Rosa stepped forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sarah's been forced to forge land deeds. Her handwriting is so beautiful, nobody can tell the difference. Rigg's been stealing property from families and selling it to railroad investors." Kane's jaw tightened. "How many families?" "Dozens, maybe more, All the black folks who settled in the valley, plus the Mexican families who have been here for generations. Anyone without political connections becomes a target. Whisper flipped through her notebook, revealing page after page of detailed observations. She documented Sheriff Riggs' meetings with well-dressed strangers. She'd sketched the faces of men who visited the jail at odd hours. Her drawings showed Sarah being escorted to and from the sheriff's office under armed guard. Kane studied the artwork with growing amazement. This child had been conducting surveillance operations that would impress professional detectives. Her silence hadn't been just trauma, it had been strategy. She's been gathering evidence, Kane realized. Whisper nodded and pointed to a drawing of the evening train. She held up 6 fingers, then pointed to the sun's position in the sky. 6 hours, Jasper translated. They're putting Mama on the evening train if we don't stop them. Kane's mind raced through possibilities. A direct assault on the jail would be suicide. Rigg kept 4 deputies on duty at all times and the building was built like a fortress. But Kane had advantages the sheriff didn't know about. Doc, I need you to spread word quietly. Every family that's been cheated by Rigg needs to meet at your office in 1 hour. Doc nodded grimly. What about the children? Kane knelt down to eye level with the twins. Up close, he could see Sarah's strength reflected in their young faces. They'd inherited her courage along with her stubborn streak. I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to understand. Your mama and I knew each other a long time ago, before you were born. I made some bad choices that hurt our family, and I've been trying to make up for them ever since. Jasper's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What kind of bad choices? The kind that made me think you'd be safer without me around. I was wrong. Whisper closed her notebook and looked directly into Kane's eyes. For the first time since entering the saloon, she opened her mouth and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Are you our papa? The question hit Kane like a physical blow. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the locket, opening it with trembling fingers. Inside sat a faded photograph of Sarah holding 2 newborn babies. The woman in the picture looked younger, happier, unmarked by years of struggle and fear. Jasper stared at the photograph, then at Kane's face, searching for resemblances. Why did you leave us? Kane's voice broke as he answered. Because I thought my enemies would hurt you to get to me. I thought you'd have a better life if I stayed away. But we didn't, Jasper said simply. We had a worse life. The truth of those words cut deeper than any knife. Kane had abandoned his family to protect them, only to condemn them to the exact dangers he'd feared. His noble sacrifice had been nothing more than cowardice dressed up as heroism. Whisper reached out and touched the locket with one small finger. When she looked up at Kane again, her eyes held a mixture of hope and wariness that broke his heart all over again. Kane led the twins through Copper Ridge's back alleys toward Doc Henley's office. Jasper walked several steps behind, his arms crossed and jaw set in defiance. Whisper stayed closer, stealing glances at her father while clutching her notebook against her chest. I don't trust him, Jasper muttered to his sister. Where's he been all our lives if he cares so much? Kane heard every word but kept walking. The boy had every right to be angry. 8 years of abandonment couldn't be erased with tears and explanations. At Doc's office, they found a dozen families crowded into the small waiting room. The Hendersons had lost their farm 3 months ago. Maria Santos clutched papers showing her family's store had been sold without her knowledge. Old Tom Fletcher held a forged deed claiming his homestead belonged to a railroad company. Kane studied each face, recognizing the same defeat he'd seen in too many towns across the territory. Riggs' corruption had spread like a disease, infecting every corner of legitimate business in Copper Ridge. How long has this been happening? Kane asked. 2 years, Doc replied. Started small with a few disputed claims. Then Sarah arrived and suddenly Rigg had perfect forgeries to back up any theft he wanted. Whisper opened her notebook and showed Kane a detailed map of the town. Red X marks indicated properties that had changed hands suspiciously. Nearly a quarter of Copper Ridge had been stolen through fraudulent paperwork. She's been tracking the pattern, Rosa Martinez observed, reading over Kane's shoulder. This child sees the whole picture. Kane knelt beside Whisper's chair. Can you show me where they're keeping your mama? Whisper flipped to a drawing of the jail's interior. She'd sketched guard rotations, window positions, and even the location of keys hanging on hooks. Her artistic eye had captured details that would make any scout envious. Jasper finally spoke up. She draws everything. Mama always said Whisper's pictures tell better stories than most folks' words. Kane studied his daughter's surveillance work with growing respect. You've been planning something, haven't you? Whisper nodded and turned to a fresh page. She began sketching rapidly, her pencil creating an image of the train station. She drew herself and Jasper standing on the platform, then added a figure in a marshal's uniform stepping off the arriving train. Federal Marshal, Kane realized. You contacted the authorities. Doc leaned forward in amazement. How would an 8-year-old girl contact federal marshals? Whisper reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small stack of letters. Each envelope bore official postal stamps and was addressed to different territorial offices. The handwriting matched her mother's elegant script perfectly. You've been forging letters, Kane said, not sure whether to be proud or horrified. Jasper's eyes widened. Whisper, you can write like Mama. His sister nodded and opened one of the letters. Inside, detailed accusations of corruption filled 2 pages in Sarah's distinctive hand. Maps, witness accounts, and specific dates created a comprehensive case against Sheriff Rigg. Kane read the letter twice, marveling at its thoroughness. When did you send these? Whisper held up 3 fingers. 3 days ago, Doc translated, which means help might be coming on today's train. Rosa checked her pocket watch. The afternoon train arrives in 2 hours. If there's a federal marshal aboard, we need to coordinate our efforts. Kane stood and addressed the gathered families. Rigg's moving Sarah on the evening train. That gives us a narrow window to act. If federal help arrives, we need to be ready with evidence and witnesses. Old Tom Fletcher raised his hand. What if no marshal comes? What if we're on our own? Kane's expression hardened. Then we handle this ourselves. But we do it smart, not violent. Over the next hour, they developed a plan. Rosa would position herself at the train station to spot any federal officials. Doc would gather medical testimony about families harmed by the land thefts. The other families would secure their original property documents as evidence. Kane would infiltrate the jail to confirm Sarah's location and condition. As the group dispersed, Jasper finally approached his father directly. Why should we believe you'll stay this time? Kane knelt to meet his son's eyes. Because I've learned that running away to protect people only makes things worse. I thought I was being noble, but I was just being scared. What if you get scared again? Kane pulled out his locket and placed it in Jasper's small hands. This is all I've carried of our family for 8 years. It's kept me alive through gunfights and blizzards because it reminded me what I was fighting to get back to. Jasper studied the photograph of his infant self cradled in his mother's arms. Mama used to cry when she thought we weren't looking. She'd stare at empty chairs like someone was supposed to be sitting there. The words cut deep into Kane's chest. He'd imagined his family moving on without him, finding happiness in his absence. The reality was far more painful. Whisper tugged on Kane's sleeve and pointed to her notebook. She'd drawn a new picture showing all 4 family members standing together outside a small house. Above the drawing, she'd written 2 words in careful letters, "Come home." Kane's throat tightened. I want that more than anything, but first we save your mama. The afternoon train's whistle echoed across the valley, signaling the arrival of either salvation or their last chance for justice. Kane checked his pocket watch and stood, his full height casting long shadows across Doc's office. It's time, he said. Whisper closed her notebook and took both Kane's hand and Jasper's. For a moment, they stood connected as a family, united by desperate hope and the promise of redemption. Whatever came next would determine not just Sarah's fate, but whether the Kane family could finally heal the wounds of 8 lost years. The afternoon train pulled into Copper Ridge Station with a screech of brakes and hiss of steam. Rosa Martinez positioned herself behind a stack of mail bags, watching passengers disembark. Traveling salesmen, cattle ranchers, and dusty settlers stepped onto the platform, but no one wore a federal marshal's badge. Kane's heart sank as he watched from across the street. No official help was coming. They were truly on their own against Sheriff Riggs' corruption network. At the jail, Kane studied the building's defenses from an alley. 4 deputies lounged on the front porch, rifles across their laps. 2 more patrolled the perimeter every 15 minutes. Whisper's drawings had been accurate down to the smallest detail. Through a barred window on the second floor, Kane glimpsed his wife's silhouette. Sarah sat at a small table, her head bent over papers as a deputy watched from the doorway. Even from this distance, Kane could see the exhaustion in her posture. Back at Doc Henley's office, the families waited anxiously for news. Jasper paced by the window while Whisper sat quietly in the corner, adding new details to her surveillance drawings. "No marshal on the train," Rosa reported breathlessly as she burst through the door. But something else strange happened. A woman in traveling clothes asked very specific questions about Sheriff Riggs' office hours. Kane's pulse quickened. What kind of woman? Well-dressed, official-looking. She had papers in a leather satchel and took notes about everything. Whisper looked up from her notebook with sudden interest. She flipped through several pages and stopped at a drawing of a woman in a dark traveling dress. The sketch showed remarkable detail, including a federal marshal's badge partially concealed beneath a jacket. "You drew this 3 days ago," Kane realized. "You knew exactly who to expect." Whisper nodded and pointed to the train station, then held up one finger. "1 hour," Jasper translated. "She's coming back in 1 hour." Doc studied Whisper's artwork with amazement. This child has been orchestrating a federal investigation while pretending to be mute. How is that possible? Kane examined more of his daughter's recent drawings. They showed her observing conversations through windows, copying documents when adults weren't looking, and even following suspicious meetings from hidden vantage points. "She's been conducting surveillance operations," Kane said with growing pride and concern, "but also putting herself in incredible danger." Whisper turned to a fresh page and began sketching rapidly. Her drawing showed the jail surrounded by townspeople, the mysterious woman presenting official papers to Sheriff Rigg, and Sarah walking free. At the bottom, she wrote the plan in careful letters. "You've been planning this entire scenario," Kane realized. "The letters, the timing, even getting me involved. None of this was coincidence." Whisper shook her head and pointed to Kane's locket, then to herself and Jasper. She drew a quick picture showing the 3 of them searching for each other across a map of the territories. Jasper's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You knew Papa was in town. You've been watching him." Whisper nodded and flipped to an earlier section of her notebook. Page after page showed Kane's daily routines. His morning visits to the stable, his afternoon drinks at the saloon, his late-night walks through the cemetery where he talked to a gravestone marked "Unknown Family." "She's been studying all of us," Doc breathed, "mapping out everyone's patterns and connections." Kane felt a chill run down his spine. His 8-year-old daughter had been conducting intelligence operations that would challenge experienced detectives. Her silence hadn't been trauma or strategy alone. It had been a cover for activities that could have gotten her killed. "Whisper, how long have you been doing this?" She held up 6 fingers, indicating the full 6 months since arriving in Copper Ridge. Rosa shook her head in disbelief. "A child has been running a one-person investigation into government corruption, while we were all too scared to speak up." Whisper turned to her most recent drawings, showing detailed floor plans of not just the jail, but Sheriff Riggs' house, the bank, and several other official buildings. She'd mapped out meeting locations, documented financial transactions, and even sketched the faces of Riggs' co-conspirators. Kane studied his daughter's work with a mixture of pride and terror. "This is enough evidence to bring down the entire corruption network. But if Rigg finds out what you've been doing..." Whisper met her father's eyes with calm determination that belonged on someone far older. She pointed to the drawing of their reunited family, then to the pictures of freed families getting their land back. She's willing to risk everything for justice, Kane realized. The sound of horses approaching made everyone freeze. Through Doc's window, they watched Sheriff Rigg and 6 deputies ride down Main Street toward the train station. The sheriff's face was grim, his hand resting on his gun. "He knows something's wrong," Rosa whispered. Whisper grabbed Kane's arm and pointed urgently to her drawing of the mysterious woman. She tapped the picture repeatedly, then pointed toward the train station. Kane understood immediately. The marshal is in danger. Rigg's going to arrest her before she can present her evidence. Outside, the sound of shouting echoed from the direction of the station. A woman's voice rose above the commotion, demanding to see official identification and proper warrants. "That's her," Rosa confirmed. "That's the woman from the train." Kane stood and checked his gun, his jaw set with determination. Time for the real plan. Whisper closed her notebook and tucked it securely inside her dress. She took Jasper's hand and looked expectantly at Kane, ready to see if her months of careful planning would finally bring their family together or tear it apart forever. The next hour would determine whether an 8-year-old girl's intelligence network could outsmart a corrupt sheriff's decade of criminal control. Kane burst from Doc Henley's office with the twins close behind. The sound of confrontation at the train station grew louder as Sheriff Rigg's voice boomed across the platform. "You have no jurisdiction here, lady. This is my territory." Through the crowd, Kane spotted a woman in a dark traveling dress facing down 6 armed deputies. Federal Marshal Elena Rodriguez stood her ground despite being outnumbered, her badge gleaming on her jacket lapel. Whisper pulled out a small mirror from her pocket and angled it toward the sun. The reflected light flashed in a pattern across the buildings of Main Street. Within moments, families began emerging from shops and houses, drawn by the signal system Whisper had organized. "She's calling the whole town," Jasper realized with amazement. The Henderson family appeared first, carrying their forged land documents. Maria Santos followed with her store ownership papers. Old Tom Fletcher hobbled forward with his homestead deed. Soon, dozens of families surrounded the train station platform. Marshal Rodriguez noticed the gathering crowd and raised her voice. "I'm conducting a federal investigation into land fraud and corruption. These citizens have the right to present evidence." Sheriff Rigg's face reddened as more townspeople arrived. His deputies shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were vastly outnumbered. "This is a local matter. Federal government's got no business here." Kane pushed through the crowd with his children. "Marshal Rodriguez, these are the victims you came to find." The marshal's sharp eyes assessed Kane quickly. "You're the one who's been writing letters in Sarah Jones' name." "My daughter," Kane replied, placing his hand on Whisper's shoulder. "She's documented everything." Whisper stepped forward and handed her notebook to Marshal Rodriguez. The federal officer's eyebrows rose as she flipped through pages of detailed surveillance drawings, forged document copies, and witness accounts. "This is the most comprehensive evidence package I've seen in 20 years of law enforcement," Rodriguez said. "Who trained this child in investigative techniques?" "Nobody," Kane answered. "She taught herself." Sheriff Rigg tried to grab the notebook, but Marshal Rodriguez pulled it away. "This is federal evidence now. Anyone who interferes will face charges in territorial court." The crowd pressed closer as word spread that justice had finally arrived. Families who had suffered in silence for years suddenly found their voices. Stories poured out about stolen homes, fraudulent sales, and forced labor arrangements. "Sarah Jones is being held illegally," Kane declared. "She was coerced into forging documents under threat to her children." Marshal Rodriguez turned to Sheriff Rigg. "Where is Mrs. Jones now?" "She's serving time for document fraud." "Perfectly legal arrest." Whisper tugged on the marshal's sleeve and pointed to a drawing in her notebook. The sketch showed Sarah chained to a desk while deputies forced her to copy legal papers. This depicts forced labor which violates federal statutes, Rodriguez stated firmly. I'm ordering Mrs. Jones' immediate release. Sheriff Riggs' hand moved toward his gun. You're not ordering anything in my town. The crowd tensed, but Kane stepped between the sheriff and the marshal. His reputation as the most dangerous man in 3 territories suddenly worked in favor of justice instead of violence. Sheriff, you're outgunned and outnumbered. Don't make this worse than it already is. Rosa Martinez pushed forward with a stack of letters. These are communications between Sheriff Rigg and railroad investors. They detail the entire land theft operation. Doc Henley added his voice. I can provide medical testimony about families who suffered physical and emotional harm from these fraudulent evictions. Marshal Rodriguez studied the mounting evidence with satisfaction. Sheriff Rigg, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and violation of federal laws regarding forced labor. You can't prove nothing, Rigg snarled. Whisper opened her notebook to a detailed drawing of a midnight meeting behind the bank. The sketch showed Rigg receiving money from well-dressed strangers while pointing to a map of stolen properties. At the bottom, she'd written exact dates and times. This child witnessed your criminal meetings, Rodriguez said. Her testimony, combined with documentary evidence and multiple witness accounts, creates an airtight case. The sheriff's deputies began backing away, unwilling to face federal charges for their boss's crimes. Without their support, Riggs' authority crumbled like a house of cards. Where are the keys to the jail? Marshal Rodriguez demanded. One of the younger deputies, barely out of his teens, stepped forward and handed over his key ring. Mrs. Jones is on the 2nd floor. She's been forced to work 18 hours a day for weeks. Kane took the keys and ran toward the jail with Jasper and Whisper behind him. His heart pounded as they climbed the narrow stairs to the cell block. Through the barred door of the last cell, he saw Sarah hunched over a desk covered with legal documents. Sarah, he called softly. She looked up, her face gaunt from exhaustion and poor food. When she saw Kane and the twins, tears began streaming down her cheeks. Is this real? She whispered. Kane unlocked the cell door and swept his wife into his arms. 8 years of separation melted away as she collapsed against his chest. Jasper and Whisper wrapped their arms around both parents, creating a circle of family unity that had been broken for far too long. Whisper planned everything, Kane said as he held his family close. She orchestrated this entire rescue operation. Sarah looked down at her daughter with wonder. You found your voice to save us all. Whisper smiled and spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried no trace of her former silence. I never lost my voice, Mama. I just saved it for when it mattered most. Outside the jail, the sound of celebration filled Copper Ridge as families reclaimed their stolen properties and their dignity. 6 months later, the Dusty Dollar Saloon had transformed into the heart of a thriving community. Fresh paint covered the weathered walls, and new windows let golden sunlight stream across clean wooden floors. The same space that once hosted corruption and fear now welcomed families for community meetings and celebrations. Kane sat at a corner table, no longer alone with his whiskey and regrets. Jasper worked beside him, carefully sanding a piece of wood under his father's patient guidance. The boy's hands moved with growing confidence as he shaped what would become a desk for Copper Ridge's new integrated schoolhouse. Like this, Papa? Jasper asked, holding up his work. Kane examined the smooth surface with genuine pride. Perfect. Your mama will have the finest desk in 3 territories. Across the room, Sarah spread blueprints across a large table while Whisper sketched architectural details in a new notebook. The school they were designing would welcome children of all backgrounds, something previously unimaginable in the old Copper Ridge. The reading corner should face east for morning light, Sarah suggested, pointing to her carefully drawn floor plans. Whisper nodded and added windows to her drawing, then wrote books for everyone in elegant script beneath the design. Marshal Rodriguez had stayed in town for 3 weeks, overseeing the complete dismantling of the corruption network. Sheriff Rigg and his co-conspirators now awaited trial in the territorial capital, facing federal charges that would keep them imprisoned for decades. The evidence Whisper had gathered led to investigations in 5 other territories, revealing a land theft operation worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Families across the region reclaimed stolen property as fraudulent documents were overturned in federal court. Kane had accepted the position of deputy marshal, trading his bounty hunting reputation for the chance to protect rather than pursue. His first official act was ensuring every family affected by the land fraud received proper legal representation. "Deputy Kane," Doc Henley called from the doorway. "The Henderson family wants to thank you again for helping them rebuild their barn." Kane waved off the gratitude with characteristic modesty. "Thank Whisper. She's the one who documented their original property boundaries." The transformation in Whisper herself was perhaps the most remarkable change of all. She had become Copper Ridge's unofficial historian, documenting the town's recovery through detailed drawings and written accounts. Her notebook from the corruption investigation was now preserved in the territorial archives as evidence of how citizen action could overcome systemic injustice. Sarah opened her document service in the renovated building that once housed Sheriff Rigg's illegal operations. Her beautiful handwriting now served honest purposes, helping families with legitimate contracts, letters, and legal papers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the skills used to forge fraud now helped build honest lives. "Mrs. Jones," Rosa Martinez announced as she entered with a group of children, "we're ready for today's reading lesson." Sarah had begun teaching literacy classes for both children and adults, recognizing that education was the best defense against future corruption. Her students ranged from 6 years old to 60, all united in their determination to read and understand the documents that governed their lives. Kane watched his wife work with quiet amazement. The woman who had suffered through months of forced labor now radiated strength and purpose. She had transformed her trauma into a mission to ensure no other family would fall victim to legal manipulation through ignorance. Old Tom Fletcher hobbled into the saloon, his weathered face creased with excitement. "Deputy Kane, got news from the territorial capital. That railroad company's been ordered to pay restitution to every family they cheated. We're talking about enough money to build a proper school, maybe even a small hospital." Applause filled the room as the gathered community absorbed this latest victory. Justice had not only been served but was actively repairing the damage caused by years of corruption. Jasper looked up from his woodworking. "Papa, what happens to people like Sheriff Rigg? Do they ever change like you did?" Kane considered the question carefully. "Some people choose to change when they see how much pain they've caused. Others keep making the same mistakes over and over. The important thing is that good people like your sister make sure the truth always comes out eventually." Whisper overheard the conversation and approached her father's table. She had grown taller in 6 months, her posture reflecting newfound confidence and purpose. "Papa, I want to be a federal marshal when I grow up, like Marshal Rodriguez." "You'd make an excellent marshal," Kane replied. "You've already solved more cases than most professionals." Sarah joined her family, settling into the chair beside Kane with a contentment that had been missing for 8 long years. The desk between them held not forged documents or desperate plans, but homework assignments from eager students and architectural drawings for a better future. "I used to think strength meant never needing help," Kane said, looking around the transformed saloon. "But watching this community come together taught me something different. Real strength is admitting when you're wrong and fighting to make things right." Whisper picked up her pencil and began sketching the scene around her. The drawing showed families working together, children learning to read, and a father teaching his son an honest trade. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "How a town learned to hope again." Outside the windows, Copper Ridge bustled with activity as honest businesses flourished and families built secure lives on legally owned land. The town had become living proof that justice delayed is not always justice denied. especially when guided by the wisdom of an 8-year-old girl who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is simply telling the truth. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.